The scream echoed through the night like a siren no one wanted to hear. It came from the White House on King Street, the one with the porch light that was always left on. For a few seconds, the small college town of Moscow, Idaho, froze. Dogs barked. A few students walking back from a party stopped and looked up the dark hill. And then, just as suddenly, the scream stopped. No one moved after that. It was almost 3 a.m., and the town that usually slept quietly under the winter sky suddenly felt wide awake. Inside that White House, something terrible had just happened. A shadow moved past the curtain upstairs. Someone was breathing hard, trying not to make a sound. And then, another sound. Slow, careful footsteps on the stairs. Creak, creak, creak. Downstairs, a phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a name, Ethan, but no one answered. By sunrise, the house would become the center of the biggest case Idaho had ever seen. News vans would line the streets. Students would whisper in shock. Parents would call their children in panic. But right now, only the cold wind and the sound of a dripping faucet filled the air. Something unthinkable had happened here, and no one yet knew why. 2 days earlier, everything was normal. Kayla, a 21-year-old student at the University of Idaho, had just finished her psychology project. She was cheerful, easygoing, the kind of girl who laughed at her own jokes. Her roommates, Lindsay, Emma, and Zoe, were her closest friends. They lived together in the 2-story house on King Street, just a few blocks from campus. That Friday evening, the 4 of them were getting ready for a small get-together. Nothing wild, just a few friends, music, and pizza. The fall semester was nearly over, and everyone needed a break before finals week. Kayla leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. Ethan says he's bringing chips and soda, she told Lindsay. Good, Lindsay said, brushing her long brown hair. Tell him to bring extra. You know how fast Zoe eats. Zoe threw a napkin at her. Hey, that was one time. They all laughed. The house felt warm, filled with the smell of candles and microwave popcorn. Outside, snow had started to fall. By 9 p.m., people began arriving. Music played softly from a speaker. The lights were dim, the mood relaxed. Kayla danced barefoot on the living room carpet while Ethan filmed her on his phone. Across the street, someone watched from a parked car. The engine was off. The windows were dark. The person inside didn't move, just stared at the glowing windows of the King Street house. Later that night, after most guests had left, Kayla and Lindsay sat in the kitchen talking about graduation, summer plans, and how strange it would be to leave Idaho. I'm gonna miss this town, Lindsay said, even though it's boring sometimes. Kayla smiled. Boring is good, means we're safe. She didn't know how wrong she was. At 1:48 a.m., the streets were nearly empty. The snow had covered the roads in a thin white layer. Inside the King Street house, the girls were asleep, except Zoe, who was finishing a movie in her room upstairs. Then, there was a faint noise outside, a soft crunch of footsteps on snow. She paused the movie, listened. Nothing, just the heater humming. She pressed play again. The music started, and then came another sound, this time closer, like a hand brushing against the wall. Zoe frowned. Maybe the wind. Downstairs, a motion sensor light flicked on outside the front porch. A figure moved past the window, just a shadow, quick and silent. Inside, the house was still. At 2:12 a.m., Kayla's phone vibrated. It was a message from Ethan. Did you just text me? She blinked, confused, and replied, No, why? No answer came back. Then her PA. One buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't a message. It was a photo. It was dark, blurry, taken through a window, but she recognized the frame immediately. It was her living room. Someone was outside. Her heart started pounding. She turned to wake Lindsay, but before she could move, she heard the floorboard creak. Not outside. Inside. Lindsay, she whispered. No answer. She reached for her phone again, but it slipped from her trembling hands. The screen cracked on the floor. She froze. Footsteps came closer, slow, careful, right outside her door. She pressed her back against the wall, her breath shallow. The knob turned slightly, then stopped. Whoever it was, they were standing there, listening. And then, silence. Her phone buzzed again on the floor. This time, it was from Zoe upstairs. "Did you just open my door?" Kayla's blood ran cold. She typed back fast. "No, lock your door now." The hallway light flickered. Somewhere in the house, something fell with a loud crash. Kayla covered her mouth, trying not to scream. She heard Zoe's footsteps running down the hall, then a short, sharp cry. And then, nothing. The house went silent again. Outside, snow kept falling, covering the fresh footprints that led up to the porch. Whatever had entered that night was still inside, and by morning, Moscow, Idaho, would never sleep again. The sun rose over Moscow, Idaho, painting the rooftops gold, but the house on King Street stayed dark. Police cars lined the narrow road. Yellow tape fluttered in the cold wind. A group of students stood across the street, whispering in disbelief. Some held their phones up, recording. Others just stared, too shocked to speak. Officer Mark Jensen stepped out of his car and tightened his coat. He'd been on the force for 16 years, but what he saw that morning would stay with him forever. Inside the house, everything was silent, except for the faint hum of radios and the clicking of camera shutters. He walked past the living room, where a cup of soda had spilled across the carpet. A phone lay face down near. The couch, its cracked screen frozen on an unread message. Upstairs, detectives moved carefully from room to room, their faces pale. In the back bedroom, he found what he was looking for. A window slightly open. Snow gathered on the sill. There were faint footprints leading up to it from outside. Whoever came in didn't break the glass. They knew how to stay quiet. Mark turned to one of the younger officers. "Make sure forensics gets every print, every shoe mark. Don't touch a thing." The young officer nodded, trying not to look shaken. Outside, news crews were setting up their cameras. A reporter spoke into her microphone. "Authorities are investigating what they're calling a tragic and mysterious incident involving University of Idaho students. The small town of Moscow is now under the national spotlight." By noon, the town was buzzing. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some said it was a break-in gone wrong. Others whispered about a jealous ex-boyfriend or a stranger who had been seen wandering near campus. At the university, classes were canceled. Students gathered in the cafeteria, their faces pale and tired. "Did you hear? They think it happened between 2 and 3 a.m., one girl said, clutching her coffee cup. "My roommate said the police found messages, creepy ones," another added. No one knew what to believe. Across town, Ethan sat in his car, staring at his phone. He hadn't slept. The police had already questioned him twice. His name was in Kayla's messages, the last person to text her, before everything went silent. He replayed that night in his head. The music, the laughter, the way Kayla had smiled at him before he left the party. She'd said, "Text me when you get home." He did, but what he got back wasn't her. That photo, the one taken through the window, still haunted him. He'd shown it to the police, but they couldn't trace where it came from. It wasn't. It sent from her number. Not exactly. It came from a hidden app, one he'd never seen before. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Who would do this? He whispered to himself. That evening, the sheriff held a press conference outside the police station. Cameras flashed. "We are working around the clock," he said firmly. "This was not a random act. We believe the victims knew the person responsible." The crowd gasped. Reporters shouted questions. "Is the suspect still in Moscow? Was there forced entry? Are students in danger?" The sheriff didn't answer. He just said, "Everyone should stay cautious. Lock your doors. Check on your friends." As the reporters packed up, the air in town grew heavier. Night was coming again, and with it, the same uneasy silence that had haunted everyone since that scream. Back on King Street, Police had left for the night. The house was now taped off, cold and empty. But something about it didn't feel truly empty. Around 11:30 p.m., a security camera from a nearby building caught something strange. A figure walked slowly past the crime scene tape, wearing a gray hooded jacket. The person stopped at the edge of the property and looked up at the dark windows. For a few seconds, they stood there, completely still. Then they turned and disappeared into the shadows. No one saw it happen. Not that night. Not until investigators reviewed the footage 2 days later. Meanwhile, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat on his couch, flipping through the pictures on his phone. The last one of Kayla was blurry, taken at the party. She was laughing, holding a red cup. He zoomed in on her face, her eyes bright and full of life. His phone buzzed. A message. No name, no number, just 3 words. You weren't supposed to leave. His heart dropped. He read it again. The number was hidden, just like the one from before. He jumped up and went to the window. The street outside was empty. Snow was falling again, soft and quiet. Then another message came through. I'm still here. He backed away from the glass. His breathing quickened. He started to dial 911, but before he could finish, something hit the side of the house. A loud thud, then another. He turned toward the sound. It came from the back door. He crept closer, his hands shaking. The door rattled once, twice, then went still. He slowly reached for the handle, his phone light trembling in his other hand. Outside, the wind howled, but underneath it, he heard it again. Footsteps. Moving closer. He whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. The knob twisted, this time from the outside. And before Ethan could move, the door slammed open. The door crashed open with a blast of freezing air. Ethan stumbled back, his phone clattering to the floor. The flashlight beam spun wildly across the kitchen, bouncing off the silver fridge, the window, and finally onto a shape standing in the doorway. A tall figure in a gray hood, still as stone. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The only sound was the wind whistling through the open door and Ethan's ragged breathing. "Who are you?" he managed to say. The figure didn't answer. It just tilted its head slightly, as if curious. Then it took one slow step inside. Ethan backed up until his shoulders hit the counter. He grabbed a kitchen knife, his hand shaking so hard he could barely hold it steady. "I called the cops," he lied, his voice cracking. "They're on their way." The hooded figure stopped, halfway between the door and the table. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it turned and slipped back into the dark, disappearing into the falling snow. Ethan slammed the door shut and locked it twice. His chest was tight, his heart hammered against his ribs. He slid to the floor and pressed his back against the cabinets, trying to breathe. But outside, under the porch light, a single set of footprints led away from the house, straight toward King Street. By morning, police were back. This time, they were there for Ethan. Officer Jensen sat across from him in the station's small interview room. The lights buzzed faintly overhead. Ethan's hands were clasped tightly together on the table. "You're saying someone came to your house last night?" Jensen asked. "Yes, I saw them. They were wearing a gray hoodie. I thought it might be the same person." "The same person from the King Street house?" Ethan nodded. "They sent me messages. They knew things only someone inside that house would know." Jensen leaned back in his chair. "Did you keep the messages?" "They deleted themselves right after I read them," Ethan said, rubbing his forehead. "It's like they vanished." Jensen sighed. "We'll check your phone anyway." He stood, signaling the end of the interview, but his face was thoughtful. As he left the room, he murmured to another officer, "If this is the same guy, he's playing games." That evening, Jensen sat in his patrol car parked near the campus. The snow had started again, light and steady. The wipers swept it away every few seconds. He was staring at his notepad when a call came through his radio. "Unit 12, We've got a report from a student at the dorms. Claims she saw someone watching her through her window. Description matches the same gray hoodie. Jensen's pulse quickened. I'm on my way. When he arrived, the girl, a freshman named Haley, was standing in the lobby, wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes were red from crying. It was like he was just standing there, she said softly. Not moving, just staring up at my window. Did you get a good look? She shook her head. No, but when I turned the light on, he was gone. Jensen went outside and scanned the snow-covered courtyard. He saw faint footprints, small, shallow ones, leading around the side of the building. They stopped near a row of trash bins. He pulled out his flashlight and moved closer. Behind the bins, something caught the light. A scrap of gray fabric, torn and frozen stiff. He picked it up with a gloved hand. It looked like part of a sleeve. The next morning, the sheriff called a meeting. The small conference room buzzed with quiet tension. Jensen laid the fabric on the table. We've got multiple sightings, he said. And whoever this is, they're not finished. They're watching. The sheriff frowned. Watching who? Jensen looked at the map pinned to the wall. He'd marked the King Street house, Ethan's home, and now the dorms. When he connected the dots, his pen formed a rough triangle. They're circling, he said quietly, like they're looking for something, or someone. Across town, Ethan couldn't stay still. He walked from room to room, checking every lock twice. He'd barely eaten. His phone lay silent on the table, and every time it buzzed with a random notification, he jumped. Then, just before sunset, it buzzed again. A message. No number. You shouldn't have told them. Ethan froze. Who is this? He typed quickly. No reply. He stared at the screen, waiting. Then another message appeared. Check your door. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he turned toward the front door. Through the frosted glass, he could see a faint shape standing on the porch. He stepped closer, holding his phone like a weapon. The shape didn't move. He reached out, ready to pull back the curtain, when suddenly the doorknob rattled violently. Once, twice, then a heavy bang shook the wood. Leave me alone, he shouted. The banging stopped. He waited, heart pounding, until he finally worked up the courage to peek outside. There was no one there, just snow falling softly under the streetlight. Then he saw it, a small envelope wedged under the doormat, his name written on it in smudged ink. He bent down slowly and picked it up. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a photo. It showed the King Street house, taken from across the street, the same night of the screams. And in the top window, barely visible but unmistakable, was a figure standing behind the glass. Not Kayla, not any of her roommates, someone else. Someone who had been there before it all began. Ethan dropped the photo, his breath fogging the air. He looked up toward the dark street, every shadow suddenly alive. Then his phone buzzed again, one final message flashing on the screen. You're next. Before he could react, a noise came from the back of the house. A soft creak, then another. Ethan turned slowly toward the sound. And this time, he knew he wasn't alone.